Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden is apologizing to world leaders for the United States' lack of climate action under the Trump administration. He spoke in Glasgow, Scotland, at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Former President Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which pledged to reduce global carbon emissions to zero by 2050. That's a move President Biden said put us, quote, behind the eight ball. Now he's hoping to show the U.S. is back at the table combating climate change.
There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be the moment that we answer history's call here in Glasgow.
President Biden's pitch for U.S. climate action is facing more trouble back in Washington. Democratic Party infighting is again threatening the president's social and climate spending plan, which aims to reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. The plan, which President Biden calls his Build Back Better plan, no longer includes penalties for power plants that don't use clean energy. The latest version includes tax credits for clean energy sources and electric vehicles. But West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is pumping the brakes again. He wants House progressives to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but is withholding his support for the social and climate plan until more details are explained.
I'm open to supporting a final bill that helps move our country forward, but I'm equally open to voting against a bill that hurts our country. And I've been very clear about that also. And most importantly, hurts every American. Let's work together, and I mean that. Let's all work together on getting a sensible reconciliation package, a package that really strengthens our nation and makes us better.
For more, let's bring in Sabrina, Rodríguez, and Courtney Subramanian. Sabrina is a national political correspondent for Politico, and Courtney is a White House correspondent for USA Today. Welcome. It's good to have you both. Courtney, let me start with you. When the president left for Europe late last week, he expressed optimism about an agreed-upon framework. So where do things stand now?
Well, I think we are still seeing Democrats on the Hill negotiate a lot of priorities that they initially had in the framework that were eliminated. We've seen Senator Sanders step forward and say he's still pushing on drug pricing reform, which is something that was eliminated on paid family leave. So I think we're still seeing, we're seeing progressives step forward and say that they progress has been made and that we're going to move forward with a vote. But then we have Senator Manchin, who is one of these key holdouts, coming out today and saying that he is not behind the bill where it's at and that he would like to see a smaller price tag. So I think in many ways we are where we were last week before the president left.
Yeah, and Sabrina, just to follow up on what Courtney was saying there, Joe Manchin says he won't support a reconciliation bill without understanding its potential impact on the national debt. So how might the White House even go about meeting that demand?
And the White House has been, obviously, for the past weeks and months, trying to please Manchin on this and get him to the negotiating table and have these discussions. So we saw that framework last week come out and this expectation and this understanding that Manchin was supportive of it. But that means in the coming weeks, they have to put together the estimates, be able to offer more analysis of how this is going to affect the budget. Now, the question is, will Manchin ultimately support this framework? Will Manchin ultimately support this bill? There's been so many iterations of, trying to get his support and figuring out a price tag and figuring out how to get that done, that it really is a question mark at this point, what exactly it is that he wants and nailing that down.
Right. Well, let's bring in our CBS News senior White House and political correspondent, Ed OKeefe, for more. So, Ed, we are still waiting for a vote on the president's spending plan. Family leave is out. Prescription drug pricing seems to be a sticking point. How are Democrats trying to salvage some of those things?
Well, it's part of what was obviously dominating the weekend. As Courtney mentioned, the talks continue regarding the possibility that they'll include something that would allow Medicare to renegotiate lower drug prices for at least some pharmaceuticals, unclear which ones. And there's still discussion about possibly doing something regarding paid leave, and if not in this bill, figuring out how to do that at some point in the future on its own. This statement earlier today by Joe Manchin, who came out and sort of declared his already well-known position on all this, that he has to see all the text, that he wants to know the price, he wants to know the details, seemed to be sort of just restating where he has stood all this time, but for whatever reason wanted to come to camera and say so and then leave without taking questions, and then accuse the other side of playing games, progressives. But, you know, all signals after that throughout the rest of the afternoon was, don't worry, Manchin appears to be on board with all this anyway, and this thing is going to be paid for. It does fulfill a lot of what he's been calling for, so no cause for panic. Whether this gets voted on tomorrow or Wednesday, as the president returns from Europe and it's signed, sealed, and delivered by the end of the week, that's, you know, not necessarily as likely. And certainly the infrastructure bill would be if, as the senator suggested, the House just took that vote and passed it and sent it to the president. I think part of why he was saying that again today is sort of reiterating, look, I want to see all these details. We're still talking about Medicare and other elements of this. It could take a while. If you'd like to deliver something for the president, get that bipartisan bill passed now, because there could be concern about having sufficient support on Wednesday, depending on how tomorrow night's contests in Virginia and New Jersey go, if there are any signs of real problems for the Democratic Party.
Well, Courtney, taking a step back, should this bill pass, it would be quite a bit smaller than what was originally proposed. So how might that play out for Democrats?
Well, I think, you know, the issue is whether or not these policies that did end up in the bill do bear out, and we see voters, you know, actually seeing the effects of those policies between now and the midterm elections next year. I think that also is part of the issue here as negotiations drag on. It's providing less and less time for Democrats to be able to, you know, say that they've delivered on some of these progressive priorities that the president campaigned on, he was elected to office on. And so, you know, ultimately, you know, the price of this bill, the top line, really depends on just which programs are going to make it in and which ones are going to be the most effective for Democrats ahead of next year.
And Sabrina, something else that looks significantly diminished in the bill are climate provisions. How does that impact President Biden's position overseas, talking about the country's commitment to address this issue?
I mean, it's been a challenge for Biden, and it will be going forward. However, based on the reaction we saw to the framework last week, that might be one of the brightest spots that we saw. There was a warm welcome for much of the provisions that were discussed in the framework that ultimately have made it in. So going forward, I think that might be one of the biggest things that we hear championed from this framework and the ultimate bill is what did get included in the framework. And I think it will be a piece that the Democrats will be touting, especially if, you know, they don't end up having an agreement or compromise on prescription drugs and some of the other priorities that have not made it into the final bill.
Well, Ed, a new NBC News poll shows 71% of Americans believe the nation is headed in the wrong direction, and it also shows that a majority of Americans disapprove of President Biden's job performance. Now, the president responded to dips in the polls. Let's listen to some of that.
The polls are going to go up and down and up and down. They were high early, then they got medium, then went back up, and now they're low. Well, look, this is look at every other president. The same thing has happened, but that's not why I ran. I didn't run to determine how well I'm going to do in the polls. I ran to make sure that I followed through on what I said I would do as President of the United States.
But Ed, what do those polls mean for the president's ability to accomplish his legislative goals?
You know, it's a good question, Elaine, and I think we're getting to a point this week where we're going to get a good sense of that because, again, you have this debate going on and you have some points being put up on the board by either Democrats or Republicans tomorrow night. If Democrats lose in Virginia, what kind of panic ensues among Democrats about that? And does that force a conversation about getting all this spending infrastructure stuff done quickly? Does it revive talk of doing things to juice the base that they helped elect Democrats on, like voting rights and police reform and issues like that? Or does it sort of stunt all the ambition and cause certain candidates from certain parts of the country that's similar to Virginia to panic and just sort of say, I can't vote for any of this kind of stuff right now because it means I'm going to lose? And what kind of leadership does the president sort of, take to start directing things once he returns to possibly help either improve his numbers and improve the Democratic brand? I think the point he was making over the weekend in those remarks in Italy is, look, we got a while to go, about a year to go until the elections, the rest of the elections, Virginia, New Jersey notwithstanding. And we should point out, we focus a lot on Virginia. Remember, Phil Murphy, the Democratic incumbent there, is on the verge of getting reelected and would be the first Democrat reelected to the governorship in New Jersey in like 50 years, something like that. So there's all this focus on Virginia and the bad news it could mean for them. There's encouraging stuff for them in other parts. And the president hasn't been as big a factor there. He is in Virginia just by virtue of the fact that, it's a state that is far more attuned to what's going on here in Washington, far more influenced by it as well. And so there's concern about it. And McAuliffe has made it an issue, and it will be the subject of great debate come Wednesday morning. Does the protracted talks that we're here talking about have any effect on voter turnout or on people feeling that Democrats haven't gotten enough done, despite the fact that they've passed all this historic legislation already, and the pandemic, of course, took a different turn. So, we'll see. But obviously, you want to be a popular politician, and you want to be a president who has a mandate. Right now, he doesn't appear to, and that's going to complicate things for him and for Congress in the weeks and months to come.
Courtney, I want to ask you about another data point that we noticed recently. Another new poll from the Public Religion Research Institute shows almost 1 in 5 respondents believe, quote, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Courtney, what do you think is behind that kind of rhetoric, and what does it suggest about the political landscape here moving forward?
Yeah, I think one of the things that this poll underscored is just, that Republicans have largely bought into the so-called big lie that the 2020 election was rigged, which of course has been repeatedly debunked by government officials, court challenges, and state audits across the country. But if you drill down, among Republicans, the number rises to 30% who believe violence might be justified to, quote, save our country. And if you look even further among the people who believe that big lie that the election was rigged, the number jumps to 39%. And I think these are major red flags, with just a year out from the midterm races, and a troubling warning for, some Republicans who may downplay the events of January 6th or former President Trump's rhetoric about a stolen election. And I think it really signals that, that post-election anger that we saw that led to the insurrection on January 6th is still very real and exists. And so, it reminds me of comments we heard from former National Security Council official Fiona Hill earlier this month, who said she thought that January 6th was very much a dress rehearsal for a larger undertaking in 2022 or 2024. And I think this poll really underscores that potential threat, and the threat of those who are raising the specter of a rigged election ahead of next year's midterm races.
Right. The data point is especially interesting because it comes at a time when we know that federal law enforcement authorities have talked about what they see as a rising threat from domestic extremists. So it's against that backdrop, too, that data point comes. Shifting gears, Sabrina, the Supreme Court is hearing a challenge to the Texas law banning most abortions and allowing private citizens to file suit against anyone aiding in an abortion 6 weeks into pregnancy. How could this issue shape the political debate in this country in the months ahead?
There's no doubt that it will be a big talking point in the coming months. Today, we got the biggest insight into how the Supreme Court is looking at the issue. For months, there's been plenty of speculation over how the more conservative judges, particularly the newest ones appointed by President Donald Trump on his way out, how they would weigh in on this issue. So today, we got some indication that Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett are interested in hearing what abortion providers have to say about the issue. The question now will be whether, the case will ultimately be heard. But we got the indication clearly was that they're more likely to listen to the case from abortion providers in the state of Texas instead of the one that is being presented by the Biden administration and the Justice Department.
All right, finally, Ed, we're going to talk more about this later in the program, but tomorrow, of course, is Election Day in Virginia. President Trump is part of a virtual rally there tonight. How might that make a difference in an already close race?
Good question. He's coming in almost literally at the 11th hour to rally Republicans to Youngkin's side, something that the Youngkin campaign doesn't necessarily want or asked for, but the former president feels compelled to engage so that he can take credit for a win, if there is a win in their future. And things are looking pretty good for Republicans, in part because Youngkin has managed to thread a needle throughout this later half, really the general election. While he made clear he supported Donald Trump last year and is proud to have his endorsement, he has spent much of the last 2 months focused on broader issues of concern and doing his best to sort of avoid any talk or questions of the former president and what he thinks of him and all the issues that come with it. But the former president, for the most part, has stayed out of things until the last few days, issuing a few statements suggesting that Youngkin and him are quite close, even though we haven't seen much evidence of that, and that Republican voters should get out and support Youngkin tomorrow. Virginia, of course, just one of probably the marquee political contests, but you got all sorts across the country. You got a governor's race in New Jersey, we shouldn't discount, and Virginia and New Jersey, only states that hold races the year after a presidential election to elect their new governors. Like I said earlier, Phil Murphy could make some history of his own tomorrow if he gets reelected. McAuliffe would make it, being only the second Virginia governor ever to win 2 different terms. It's the state that doesn't allow people to run for reelection right away, but they can come back and do it later. He's going to be perhaps the second to do it if he wins. But you got interesting mayor's races all over the country. New York is going to elect a new mayor. Boston's going to elect a woman for the first time. Minneapolis is having its first mayor's race since George Floyd's death. Atlanta has a crowded runoff as well. Over a city that is rapidly changing. So most Americans have something to vote for tomorrow, and we'll track the big ones, of course, here, with a lot of the focus on Virginia because it's such a good example of what could transpire in other competitive congressional districts and Senate races and governor's races next year. Democrats might be in control of things, but if the Democratic brand is struggling, Virginia voters may give us a sign tomorrow that they're looking for something different. And Glenn Youngkin is offering something quite different than many Republicans right now. He's distinctly running a campaign on issues built around his intriguing personality that has drawn thousands across the state. And it could be a signal to Republicans that if you're looking to win in competitive states where Donald Trump isn't necessarily popular, this is the way to do it. Stay tuned.
A lot of political implications. Ed OKeefe, Sabrina Rodríguez, and Courtney Subramanian, thank you all very much.
Take care.